And so David and the commander of his army actually murder this man, and David takes her as his wife and has a child, which Matthew does not hesitate to point out. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Why? I mean, here you have one twisted tale after another just pulled out. Why would Matthew put these things into the genealogy of Jesus? I mean, why? You got to think about that a little bit. As you continue reading, I mean, it's so fascinating to read through the story of the kings that followed David. It's just like there's just one bad moment after the next. You get, for instance, in verse 7, Solomon was the father of Rehoboam. I don't know if you know this story. I mean, it's such a good story. I wish I had time to tell you all the stories. I mean, it's just so fascinating. I'm sure that Matthew, I mean, he knows about all this stuff. Rehoboam became king after Solomon. Solomon had built up the temple. He had all these projects and works. He had really worked the people. He had taxed them so he could build these things. When Solomon died, the people actually came to his son Rehoboam. They said, listen, it's been so hard for us as workers under Solomon. I mean, we've been taxed. We've worked hard. Give us rest. Lighten up a little bit, and we'll serve you as king and give you our devotion. Rehoboam, he's this new king. He doesn't know what to do. So he actually says, listen, come back in 3 days. I'll give you my answer. The first people he goes to consult about this are the elders in Israel. And the elders gather around and they say, listen, Rehoboam, do what the people say. Kind of lighten the burden a little bit. And they will love you and serve you forever. So he thinks about that advice. He has some young friends. And he goes and he bounces it off of them. What do you think I should do? The young friends say, listen, if you lighten up now, they'll never take you seriously. And so go to them and say this, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. And say this, that my father whipped you with whips, but I'm going to scourge you with scorpions. So 3 days later, he gathers the people back together and he says that very thing. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. And if my father whipped you with whips, I'm going to scourge you with scorpions. And the people are so distressed by this that they actually revolt, and the kingdom of Israel is divided in half. And as you go down this list, it's like one king after the next just continues to make it worse and worse and worse. I mean, in the middle of verse 8, Jehoshaphat, the father of Jehoram. I mean, Jehoram is this guy who turned the people away from God to serve idols. You go even farther down, you have people like Ahaz and Manasseh who actually sacrificed their own kids to gods. They shut down the temple. I mean, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse in Israel. Why would Matthew include these people in the genealogy? I think there's an important reason, something that I think Matthew is absolutely excited about. I mean, it's just great when you think about what this message is. I think one of the things Matthew is saying is, listen, God had a plan. And whether it was an uptime or a downtime, whether there was great things happening or terrible things happening, God was working out his plan. And I think this is a powerful message, and if you just think about it for a moment, you realize its application for your life. You know, it tends to be when we're up on the peaks, so to speak, we think, oh yeah, God's right here with us. But when we're down in the valley, whether we're facing, terrible struggles of whatever kind, it's possible for us to begin to think, man, God is far away right now. And Matthew, I think, is caught up with this message, like, you know what? Even in the worst moments, God had this plan and he was carrying it out. There were times, if you begin to read through the history, that there was only one remaining descendant who fit the category of being a son of Abraham and a son of David. There were times when there was just like one person who represented that, and yet God was at work through the whole thing. I think the application for us is whether we're at the heights or whether we're at the depths of the valley, we can be certain that God is working out his plan, and it will be fulfilled in our lives. The next thing, and I think this is really important, in fact, probably the most important thing. You think about this genealogy. It's filled with people who were adulterers, murderers, liars, thieves, idolaters. I mean, just scoundrels almost of every kind. You couldn't make this stuff up, the twisted nature of the lives of the people that God used to bring Jesus into the world. And I think if we really think about this a lot and why Matthew wanted to include this, and you almost have to kind of take the veneer off of what we're doing here today. You know, you get together in church and you think to yourself, you know, God's people are the ones who have it together. And you walk into church, you see people who are probably dressed better than they normally are on any given day. They're smiling as though everything's okay. And you think, you know what? God's people are the ones that have it together. Those are the ones that God uses, the ones who have it most together in their life. And I think Matthew has this totally different message. You want to know the people that God used to bring Jesus into the world? They were some of the most twisted, sinful, broken people. And God used them in this most special way to bring his son into the world. And Matthew is totally caught up with this message. As you read through his gospel, one of the people that Jesus interacts with in the worst possible way are people that think, hey, I've got it together. And people who are kind of looking their nose down on sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes and people who don't have it put together. And Jesus basically has this: listen, I came to seek and save the lost. And I think Matthew, he's looking at this, he says, do you see the kind of people God uses? They're not the ones who are put together, they're the ones who are broken, who are twisted, whose lives are chaotic. You know, as pastor of this church, one of the things I'm privileged to hear is your lives' stories. And I know that in this congregation, there are people who have gone through every kind of hurt and pain you possibly can. There are people who have messed up in big ways. There are people who have cheated on their wife or their husband. There are people who are seated in this room who have lied, who have stolen, who have been addicted to any possible thing you could be addicted to, whether it be drugs or alcohol or pornography. There are people who are seated in this room right now who have lived their lives with a loveless marriage. There are people in this room who have had to face the death of a spouse or two spouses, who have had to face the death of a child. There are people who are broken in every way imaginable here. And it would be possible for religious people to think God would never or could never use those kind of people. Which is why I think Matthew led off with this. You want to know the kind of people that Jesus came for? It's the kind of people who are just like us, whose lives are twisted in ways that you could not make up if you wanted to write a book about it. These were people whose lives were riddled with sin, disappointment, struggles of every kind. And Matthew has this great message. These are the kind of people that Jesus came from and for and through. I hope by now you kind of caught a flavor of what this is, whether in the up times or whether in the down times. Jesus is for you. That's what this genealogy is about. You are the kind of people that Jesus came for, no matter what it is that you've faced or are facing now. And this is why, for me, I just want to get back to this one thing about Jesus. Let's just simplify. Let's learn about his life. Let's figure out who he is. Let's rediscover his message. And let's realize his power. And if you've maybe come here today and you've heard for the first time that Jesus Christ came for people just like you, if you've heard for the first time that God loves someone just like you, and that's the reason he sent his son, then I want to invite you to surrender your life to Jesus Christ today. And I invite you to become his follower.